Well, hey everybody, and welcome to Ministry Hangouts with Greg Surratt. Except this week it is, or this month rather, it is Ministry Hangouts with Greg Surratt being in China. And so, but we are very excited to have you along for the ride. My name is Sean Wood, and the co-host normally of Ministry Hangouts, just helping Pastor Greg wherever I can with that. But today, I have the pleasure and the honor of being able to just ask the questions and hopefully get to ask the questions that you have for us to our guests. Let me just tell you a little bit first how to do that. If you will go to Twitter, you can ask your question there, hashtag it with Ministry Hangouts, and we would love to have your questions be a part of what we're doing today. Also, if you want to get the archives of Ministry Hangouts and you want to find out more about what's been happening over the last almost 2 years now, we've got lots of episodes there. They're great for your staff meetings. They are great for just kind of learning more yourself, sending them to a friend that are in ministry, leaders in ministry, something good to work through, so you can do that as well. You can find all the archives at ministryhangouts.org, or you can look for them on iTunes at our podcast, and this will be archived immediately after the show today, and then also the podcast will be out within just a couple of days, and you'll get the update on that. So today we have just a very interesting topic, I think, to both those all those who are in ministry, as well as those who are leaders, and then also just as those of us who are in ministry to spread this good news, no pun intended, you'll figure that out in just a minute, but this good news about what's happening in marriage. But before we get there, let me introduce to you our guest today that we are just privileged to have on with us. First, we have Shanti Feldhahn, and I just want to say just welcome. Thank you for being here with us, Shanti. Why don't you just tell us a little bit about yourself and your family? Of course, we'll get into the books here in just a moment and what you found in your latest book. But just tell us a little bit about who you are, what you're up to, and your family.
Yeah, sure. Hi, everybody. I'm really, really glad to be with you guys. I've been married almost 20 years. We're coming up on our 20th wedding anniversary in about a month. And Jeff and I have a couple of kids, and the reason I'm here with you is that I'm a social researcher and an analyst by background. And I've spent the last 10 or 12 years studying men and women and marriages, and have uncovered a couple of things that I'm excited to share today.
Awesome, and we are very excited to have you on the call. I got to meet Shanti about 6 or 7 years ago, I think it was, when we had the honor of having her at Seacoast Church and to share with our church there, and it was just a great time. My wife and I have both been through the books, the For Women Only and For Men Only, and I have to admit I've kind of read both of them. I just gotta admit that.
Good for you.
Had to figure out what you were saying, about the others as well. So, but it's great to have you, and we're going to be talking about the good news about marriage in just a minute that you've uncovered with some research, and it's the good news we need to spread. Also today we have my friend and counselor and Seacoast pastor and frequent guest to Ministry Hangouts, Chip Judd. Chip, tell us a little bit about who you are and your family.
I'm been married 38 years, 38 awesome years. Got 3 kids, 2 granddaughters, and a third something on the way. We don't know what yet, but it's whatever, you know what I mean. And tell you about myself. I planted and pastored a church, my wife and I, and also I'm a marriage and family counselor. And what that all shifted toward is I started to travel and do consulting and working with leaders and their teams, and really found myself getting behind the curtain, I call it, and really trying to help leaders get healthier, stay healthier, build healthier cultures, and just had a lot of fun really trying to figure out how to get the church rocking and rolling with a better model. So I just love to mess with leaders' heads.
That is awesome, and I can say that my wife and I have benefited from Shanti's books, definitely from when you spoke at Seacoast, and we have benefited from Chip's just speaking life into our lives and our marriage, and it's been incredible. So I'm just super honored, want to learn today. I can't wait to learn. In fact, we're going to learn about some good news. Shanti, we have all heard the grim facts, or at least supposed facts, that 50% of all marriages end in divorce, and that doesn't change at all for Christians. And the grim facts are just, it's just all going bad. Everything's not going good. But through some research that actually kind of was spurred a little bit. You were already doing the research, was spurred a little bit through a conversation with Pastor Greg, actually. You found out some good news about marriage. Why don't you tell us how that went with Pastor Greg, and when you had a chance to kind of just see that reaction that he had to this good news you were finding, and then just a little bit about some of the research that you found in your latest book, The Good News About Marriage.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, because I just have to state for the record, this entire thing is Pastor Greg's fault. Just so you know. Yeah. No, I had been one of those people who, like everyone else, had mentioned those really kind of discouraging, depressing facts from the stage. You know, half of marriages end in divorce. And in the church, it's the same. We got to work harder, everybody. You know, that had been my shtick. And I was also at the same time, I used to be a syndicated newspaper columnist, and I was writing a column on marriage and divorce, started to research certain things about the divorce rate, found it very complicated, but it didn't match at all the conventional wisdom about everything being so discouraging. In fact, some of the numbers were way better than I thought they should be. And so I started to dig into that for a couple of years and realized that it was very encouraging. And I didn't have all the facts yet. I was still digging into it. But I went and did a pastoral interview at Seacoast for the worship services, and we were supposed to be talking about for women only. That was what Pastor Greg had invited me to talk about. And in the room ahead of time, we were planning things. He said something about the 50% divorce rate, and about the fact that the rate was the same in the church. And I said, well, actually, Pastor Greg, I've been finding that's not true. And I started telling him a little bit of what I've been finding, and his eyes got real big, and he's like, seriously? You know, I might just want to mention that in the services this weekend. So I think we talked about for women only like 5 minutes of the service because he was so engaged by wanting to share this hope with his congregation. And he, as a leading pastor, clearly responded to this and it seemed like it was giving him encouragement, as well as, I mean, I had been very encouraged by it. And then I saw the reaction of the congregation, and I thought, oh my, I really need to look into this more. I need to nail this down for real. And that's really one of the main things that spurred me to think about actually making this a book.
Awesome. And that's incredible good news. And we were talking earlier off air just a little bit about the hope that it gives. And I think that's what you saw in Pastor Greg's eyes, is that this hope that we give, that we've been telling people it's all the same, you're not any different. And then we realize that it's actually a lot closer to healthy. As you get healthier in your spiritual life, it gets a lot closer to healthy in your marriage too. And I think about that, Chip, as you're working with pastors a lot, leaders a lot, and so you're seeing probably this to be the truth, that we're a lot closer to healthy than sometimes we think we are, and you get to kind of see the payoff of that sometimes, of what just a little bit of work, honestly, can make such a big difference in marriages. What do you find, Chip, to be some of the biggest things that help marriages once this encouraging news is there, that you're closer than you think, it's better than you think? What are some of the things that you see couples able to do to kind of run towards that turnaround that we often see us couples able to have?
I mean, I think some of the things that differentiate Christian couples is, you know, I mean, let's face it, the commitment level is rooted in something beyond themselves. So that tends to make you hang in there a little bit longer, not always, but usually. I think, you know, if you're in a reasonably healthy church, you're going to have more resources available to you than most people out there outside of church have. I mean, if you just are an occasional attender, you're going to be exposed to content that somebody out in the world that doesn't go to church is not likely to hear and be around. And then probably another big piece that helps the Christian couple is that just the sheer experience of community. I believe easily 80-90% of what we deal with in adult life is a product of our childhood, and it's kind of caught rather than taught. And I think in the chemistry of community, I like to call it, if you just, I would say this to you, I virtually guarantee you that if you don't do anything else but hang around a healthier group of people. You don't change anything else in your life. You don't read any books. You don't go to counseling, nothing. But if you just hang around a reasonably healthier group of people, you're going to become somewhat healthier. So, I think there's just a lot of things that work for us in the church, and you could almost say most of that's by accident.
Yeah.
So when we start doing things intentionally, it just produces lots of return.
Ashanti, I want to jump on something Chip said there, because my wife and I have seen this in our lives, and I wonder whether it's something you found to be true in your research, is the life-giving church and the community that Chip is talking about. We look back, and we're getting ready to preach, actually, together, share a sermon on marriage, and just kind of walking through our almost 20 years as well. We'll celebrate 19 this year, so we're right behind you and Jeff. But as we look at the times when we struggled the most, if we were just be really honest, and I mean no disparagement to the churches we were in at that time, but it just wasn't life-giving. It wasn't, the community there wasn't life-giving. It didn't speak life into the marriages, and it was more discouragement than it was hope and encouragement. And so along with that, have you seen that to be true? And kind of a follow-up to that question, what does that message of 50% in the divorce, you're the same as everyone else, what kind of discouragement does that cast into marriages, and what did you find about that research?
Well, let me answer the last question first, because the feeling that the 50% divorce rate is sort of a flip the coin feeling. What it does is it leaves people feeling, why bother? I mean, it's almost like nothing you do makes any difference. So why try? It's also very much a feeling of, for example, I was talking with a woman that I know who and know fairly well, has over the last few years really struggled in her marriage, and her husband has struggled with a few things, and it's just been a difficult season. And she said, until I started telling her what I was uncovering about this, she would literally look around church on Sunday morning, and this was a conscious thought. This wasn't even a subconscious sort of impression. She would look around church on Sunday morning and think to herself, if half of these people can't make it, what chance do I have? And it almost made it easier to give up, because you kind of think, what's so special about me? And it makes it very easy to give up. One of the things that's the big theme of the Good News About Marriage, and really the reason I'm trying so hard to get this word out there, is that I have seen in the research with men and women over the years, like you talked about from my other books, that there really is this one common denominator underneath whether a marriage survives or fails. There really is just this. There's lots of factors, as Chip can tell you better than I can. There's lots of factors behind marriage problems. But underneath the surface of what happens, which outcome happens, is really whether the couple has a sense of hope or not, or whether they have a sense of futility. Kind of like, if they think, yeah, we're having trouble, but we're going to make it, it's a completely different thing than if they think, oh, we're not going to make it. And so that sense of futility can kill a marriage. And right now, culturally, we have this feeling of futility, and it turns out it's based on these beliefs, this conventional wisdom, that a lot of it just isn't true. Now, there are some things that are a concern, and a very real concern, about the state of marriage. For example, right now, it is actually accurate that many more people are living together today before they get married than they used to. That is very real, and it's a very big concern. But I even ask, why are they living together? Why are there more people who are avoiding marriage? And I think it's because we have gotten this cultural discouragement about marriage, so people give up too easily. You asked me to share what some of the actual facts were that I found. So let me just throw a couple of those out, if you don't mind. Sean, is that okay?
Great, yeah.
Okay. So let me just share just briefly to get us all on the same page. Right now, the 50% divorce myth, I should say, it is truly a myth. The idea that half of all marriages have ended in divorce, we've never come close to that number. For society as a whole, Sure, there are some subgroups, high-risk groups that have probably hit 50%. For example, if you get married as a teenager, that group has a very high divorce rate. Some of those groups do have an over 50% divorce rate, but that's like 5% of the population, right? That's not for society as a whole. So here's a better number that I think, having looked at all the different studies, that I think is a really good one that we can look at. Right now, according to the Census Bureau, and this is not some little sideline study, this is the Census Bureau, right now 71% of women are still married to their first spouse. Mm. And actually it's 81% of men. You know, women tend to outsurvive their husbands. So we tend to use women as the more conservative number. So 71% of women are still married to their first spouse, and the 29% that aren't, that's not even the divorce rate. That includes everybody who was married for 50 years until a spouse died. No one really knows what the first marriage divorce rate is. We know it's got to be less than 29, because that's death and divorce. And we can estimate, because of the rate of widowhood, there's some other factors, maybe somewhere around 20 to 25% of first marriages have ended in divorce. Now, obviously, that is still way too high. You know, a 20 to 25% divorce rate for first marriages, that's still nothing to get, you know, really excited about. But it is a completely different feeling to be able to tell someone who's struggling in their marriage, stick with this. You know, most marriages last a lifetime. If most people can get through this, you can too. So that feeling, that knowledge, we have to replace the conventional wisdom. So people know that most marriages really are strong and last for a lifetime. The rate of divorce in the church, which is one of the things that Pastor Greg really kind of responded to that day when I started telling him about this. The rate of divorce in the church, the idea that it is the same as it is outside the walls of the church, that is a major misunderstanding of the George Barna studies. Everyone thinks that Barna found that, and he didn't, because he never actually studied people in the church. That wasn't what he was trying to study. What Barna was really looking at only was belief systems. So, you know, someone who says, I'm a Christian, or I'm a Muslim, or I'm an atheist, those groups have the same divorce rates. But Barna specifically excluded from the analysis whether they went to church, because that, you know, again, that wasn't what he was trying to study. So what I did is I partnered with the Barna group and bought that same data set. And we reran all of those numbers with, you know, just that one factor added in of, was the person actually in church last week? Kind of as a proxy for, is their faith a real alive part of their life? Are they getting in community, like what Chip was saying? Are they getting in that teaching? That's just a proxy for that. And what we found with the Barna numbers, and actually all the other studies that have been done on this, there's about 4 or 5 of them that are really good, find that if somebody goes to church in general every week, every other week, the divorce rate plummets. And those numbers generally, it drops anywhere from 25 to 50%. Some subgroups even more than 50%. That's huge for the average pastor or Christian counselor to know.
Yeah. So what I'm hearing here too is, so all of us, if we have been preaching for any amount of time at all, at some point we have probably used the language of 50% in, and same as you were saying, it's because it was a huge problem. But I never thought of, until you just said this, the discouraging factor that would be to the receiver of that information, which is, gosh, it doesn't matter what I do. It's still 50-50 no matter what I do in this. And so, you're sitting there trying to think this, and you're sitting there trying to figure this out as a person receiving that information. That would be very discouraging. So then, what should we be preaching? I just heard, what I'm hearing is, if you just do, like Chip said, if you just hang around with moderately healthy people, meaning in church, every now and then, immediately it plummets by 50%. And now, did you dig any deeper, Shanti, into that? Did you see anything like? Is there any other steps that make it even dip further? Is there any research out there that says that at all, or is that about as deep as the research goes?
No, there's a bit more research. The one thing that I was really frustrated by, actually, is that one of the common things that I had heard and had said many times was that there have been studies that have found that praying together daily makes a massive difference in divorce rates. Like, people who pray together daily have only a 1 in 10,000 divorce rate. And unfortunately, we felt like our job was to look into all of the studies out there and find what is actually true versus myth, even if I wish it were true. And unfortunately, we cannot find that study. It's been mentioned in a Dr. Phil book. Dr. Phil references a source that it doesn't exist, unfortunately. Now, in some research that has been done by other people, not specifically about the impact of prayer or Bible reading, for example, there is some pretty good anecdotal evidence. There are some pretty good small studies that show that it does make a huge difference, but there's nothing that I can find that shows that definitively. I think we all know it does for sure make a difference. I am dying now for somebody to take this on and do a really good study of this to document what I think we know is likely to be found. Now, that said, there are some very good studies on the impact of community, and that's what Chip was just saying. And I haven't seen any specifically in the Christian community, but all of the studies that have been done out there sort of in society has found that some of the happiest groups of people, for example, are church-going Christians. And one of the reasons for that is there's just a human need that God has given us for fellowship, and we have an opportunity in the church that a lot of non-churchgoers don't have. They're just lonely. And so that we do know out there in society has been studied. The impact of community is powerful, and obviously church is one of the best places to get that.
And of course, we know if you want to take your marriage from good to great, read For Men Only and For Women Only, and you'll do that. Prayer and
thank you for the plug.
And it has been true. Chip, in all seriousness, so we've talked about that if you hang around moderately healthy people, you're going to be moderately healthier. I mean, it's just going to happen. But then, what do you see? Because you work with pastors and leaders who, hopefully, for the most part, have good marriages. I mean, you're working on them, you're fine-tuning them, you're helping them. What do you see go to great marriages? And just as kind of a story to that, I can say, that's where Connie and I were. Honestly, we had a good marriage, like we really did, and we felt like we had a very strong commitment to one another, good marriage. There was no divorce on the, even on the page for us. But we wanted to be great, and we started visiting with you a couple years ago. We've been on a pretty fairly regular basis visiting with you, and we feel like that it has enhanced and given us tools and abilities to go to a great marriage now. I mean, I really could say to people now when it comes to my marriage, follow us as we follow Christ, because I think we're a good model for a great marriage. But it comes to we took a different step, a next step than just hanging out with healthy people. We went even an extra step. What other things? Obviously, counseling. I think both of you guys, have in your books. Shanti have talked about that, and I think Chip, I know you would be a proponent of get counseling before you need it. Talk to people before you need it. Right. What else, Chip, have you seen as people take that good to great step in their marriages?
If you think about what we're talking about and some of the common themes that are coming up, like community, it's an interesting thing in the secular arena or in the church, but I think it's exaggerated even more in the church. The higher you go on your professional cycle, the harder it is for people to be truthful with you. So, it's a CEO issue that the people working for you tell you what you want to hear. So what I found, and this was hindsight, what I found, I love John 8:31 and 32. Jesus said to those Jews who believed, "If you continue my word, then you're my disciples indeed. You shall know the truth, and the truth will set you free." And what I mean by that is this: every one of us is stuck in some area, whether it's our marriage or whatever. We're kind of at a point where, you know what, we've done all we know to do and we can't seem to get around the corner. I would say to you without any apology or hesitation that when you're stuck, it's always an issue of truth. It's always truth you either don't have enough of, or you're applying wrong. And chances are you're not going to get that straight unless you get some truth from somewhere you're not getting it right now. Meaning, like, let's just say I'm a Greg Surratt and I pastor a church of 10, 12,000 people, and I'm stuck. Who am I going to talk to? Who am I going to go to and say blah, blah, blah? And the deal is, the onus is on your back to find someone. And the crazy thing is, and I'll use you and Connie, Sean, it's much easier from a counselor's perspective. It's much easier to move a 5 to a 7 than it is a 1 to a 3. I don't know if that makes sense, but people that are reasonably healthy, it's much easier to create progress. So guys, ladies, couples that are doing, like you said, they have a good marriage, but they want a great marriage. You'd be amazed at how little it might take to push them to levels they never thought they could reach. But they're probably going to have to be uncomfortable temporarily. They're probably going to have to give someone permission to poke and prod around in areas that they're not used to. One of the things I respect so much about Greg, I came in here doing some consulting. He said, hey, can you stay after one day? And we went in his little office, and here I was with Greg Surratt, and he threw some stuff on the table and then looked at me, and I thought, this is ridiculous. Greg Surratt wants to know what I think. But what he was doing was opening his heart up to be talked to in areas where he was stuck. And whenever anybody does that, my respect for them goes up, not down. And leaders think their people are truthful with them. They are not. They are not. You've got to find somebody who loves you but is not afraid of you and really doesn't need anything from you. And if you ever find somebody who loves you and will speak the truth to you, pay them whatever you have to keep them in your life. Because they'll help you get places you'll never get without them.
Yeah, absolutely. And so you've seen it, Chip, where there's a couple discouraged, and and then like Shante said before this research was out, it was like, man, it's 50-50 chance. I mean, we're kind of good, but it's a 50-50 chance that we're going to even make it, and it seems like nobody else is hardly making it. And then we've seen the younger generation going, well, why even get married? Let's just live together because it's 50-50 chance we're not going to make it anyway. And so that good marriage, though, can go the other way. Like, it can start to crumble. Chip, what's one or two things that you see that's when that starts to happen, is when a couple does this, they could have gone to great, but instead they start going backwards in their life?
I'll mention one thing again that we've said third, fourth time now. The other part of those statistics, I do believe Proverbs 13:12, hope deferred makes the heart sick, and I think just like Shanti's saying, those statistics, crush people's hope. But there's another thing that crushes people's hope, and that is the absence of happy marriages. In other words, in church, you can look pretty hard before you find really good, glowing, happy couples. And so part of it is, there's just not a lot of tour guides around. A lot of travel agents that'll tell you how to get there, but not many that have been there that can walk you there, which is what a tour guide does. Here's my deal, Sean. Most people misunderstand the purpose of marriage in the first place, so we start wrong. Most people think, well, God, started marriage so that, we'd all have goosebumps and have our needs met and be able to have sex, and I'll never feel unloved again for the rest of my life. And, obviously about a month in, you're like, well, that didn't work out so well. But it's because they missed the point. I believe marriage serves the same purpose everything else does, and that is to give us the opportunity to see ourselves as we really are, and then ask God to do something about it. So to me, marriage is the best mirror that we have. So in my marriage, I see how selfish I am. I see how whatever. And then the $1 million moment is, what am I going to do with that? Am I gonna blame it on you? And because you're going to probably give me plenty of things I can, criticize you for, or am I going to realize that God's using your stuff to rub against my stuff so that I can grow and change? And if you ask me right now, what is the biggest thing that will make a marriage work? It's a mutual commitment to never stop growing. If you make a mutual commitment to never stop growing, then every argument you have is raw material for growth. And it just changes the paradigm you look at your marriage through. Does that make sense?
That is good stuff. And it is also helpful if you have a counselor who will look at you and say, Sean, you're the problem. Like that really is helpful too. No.
Why don't we say it the way I really said it? Sean, you are a bonehead.
Yeah, that's probably much closer to the truth. And Connie is pretty much perfect, so you're just going to have to try to raise the bar.
I had to make stuff up to talk about her.
Yeah, absolutely. But so Shanti, because of the success of your books, and you present research, raw, research that's just factual based, but then you also give insight into those research. And I know because of that, speaking at churches, just being in community yourself, that you've had plenty of conversations, plenty of emails, and opportunities to hear of the sad part of the brokenness that is often in marriage and the things that are there. And so what would be the encouragement that you've learned through this journey of the last years as you put this information out, but then also seen the effects of the beautiful side of it and sometimes the ugly side of what's going on in marriage? What would be a couple things that you'd say to people and that have helped them work through what's out there, maybe resources that can help them, or just things that you've found that are helpful to get on the other side from good to great in the marriage?
It's interesting. Chip said something early on that to me so perfectly nails it. One of the other things that I cover in the book is the fact that one of the myths is this idea that marriage is just really complicated, and getting from good to great is going to take 3 years of psychotherapy. It's this feeling that, again, no matter what you do, it's not really going to get you there or get you there very easily. You're going to have a very long slog. And yeah, absolutely, sometimes with some couples, they are dealing with those really, really big issues. But that's not the majority. As Chip pointed out early on, you really do in most cases. You have a husband and wife who really care about each other. And they're trying really hard. They just don't realize that maybe, again, they're lacking the truth. They're lacking that information. They're trying hard in the wrong areas. And sometimes they're hurting each other, and they have absolutely no intention of hurting each other the way that they're doing. And so they get all defensive because, you should have known that that wasn't what I meant or whatever. And one of the things that I found that has been this big picture encouragement to my own marriage, and then really it's one of the reasons why, churches like Pastor Greg's invite me to come speak or to do a pastoral interview on a Sunday morning, is in most cases I am just sharing these little things, and they're pretty high leverage, but they're not complicated. They're relatively simple. It's just stuff we didn't know. Like, for example, you talked about for women only and for men only. One of the reasons, as I was doing the research on for women only to help women understand men, one of the things that really struck me as a wife was I was trying so hard to show Jeff I loved him, and I was saying I love you, and I was doing all these things that I hoped, he'd find to be really loving. And I had no idea that that was nice, but that really didn't hit him very much. And at the same time, I'm telling him what to do all the time. And so he's feeling like, I think he's an idiot, and I had no idea that for a guy, according to my surveys at least, Jeff, like most men, he'd give up feeling that I loved him if he could just feel that I appreciated him and that I trusted him and respected him and believed in him. And I had no idea that when I'm telling him what to do or criticizing him a lot, or I can't believe you forgot to bring home the dry cleaning again, I had no idea that for him, he tells me now he'd rather chew broken glass than 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 deal with that. See, both you men are laughing. You get this intimately, but for us as women, we have no idea. And it's the same thing on the men's side. That there are some things that a man is trying so hard. He's working 70-hour weeks away from his wife and his kids to provide for them and to say, I love you. And he has no idea that they're feeling abandoned. And it's truly just a mismatch because you don't know some of these things. So to me, that was one of the most encouraging pieces of information that I came across, was just how some of this stuff, again, not all, but some of it, it's not always easy, but it's simple. And frankly, one of the big pictures that you mentioned that I just want to bring in here, about the purpose of marriage, it's that whole thing of not necessarily to make us happy, but to make us holy. The whole concept of we have a wrong view. One of the things that I found that is really encouraging to people is to recognize that that's true, but it doesn't necessarily mean being miserable in the meantime. And that iron sharpening iron, you can still really enjoy your marriage. The key to a happy marriage is what you're going to focus on and whether you're going to let God do that.
And that is such encouraging, news to hear. I think one is encouraging to hear that maybe it's not as bad as we thought it was, and that there's a chance that our marriages can actually make it. Two, that it's not as hard as we sometimes think it is. Now, we all know if you've been married for more than 5 minutes, you know that marriage is hard, but life is sometimes hard. And so, it's just what it is, but it's not quite as complicated as we make it out to be. I tell Connie all the time, I'm a simple creature, like I really am. And it is really very, very simple, oftentimes, if we can figure out how to meet one another's needs and to be grown, and we grow like Chip was saying in Christ. And so it's just encouraging to hear that. I hope it's encouraging to ministry couples right now who are watching this, for you to hear that. And maybe you've just planted a church, or maybe you're in the midst of your 20th year in a church and it's just hard again, and you're trying to figure things out, and that you find this encouragement that, number one, you can make it. Number two, the people you're pastoring can make it, because I know for me sometimes it's carrying the load of knowing the amount of marriages that are in trouble out there. That's very discouraging even as a pastor, but the statistics show that they can make it, and with just a few tweaks they can make it. In fact, Chip, maybe there's a ministry couple out there right now who's struggling, and they may not be in a church of 15,000, maybe they're in a church of 1,500 or 150, but the principle is the same. There's just not a lot of people that they can go to and say, hey, I'm your pastor, and my wife and I hate each other right now, and not get shown the door. And so it's hard for them, and to find someone they can really, really talk to. What would be your step one to them today? Like, how can they find that person? What's resources that they can go to, and where do they find like a Chip? I mean, is that what they need to do, and how do they do that, and what's a resource that you would give to them?
I mean, not finding a Chip, but I'll play off of that. Obviously, if you can find someone who understands the world that you live in. I mean, I do happen to be a pastor and a counselor, and argued with God for years on let me do one or the other, but now I see why he didn't do that. But obviously that'd be the ideal, if you could find somebody who understands your world. But in the meantime, I mean, I don't mean it ugly, but let's face it, a little humility goes a long way. And sometimes what a pastor needs to do is, if he's got confidentiality concerns, go to the next town over. But call some churches, do some research. There's almost always a competent counselor somewhere within an hour drive of you. And, find a competent counselor. Here's the deal. Even if they're not perfect, they're not the best in the world, they're still going to provide a perspective of your marriage that's going to be different from yours or your spouse's. And that in itself, if they don't do anything, what I realize sometimes I am in a marriage counseling session? I'm an interpreter. All I'm doing is saying, no, that's not what she meant. This is what she really just said. Oh, what? Is that what you meant? Yeah, that's what I meant. That's what I've been saying. No. So sometimes all I do is interpret, and you'd be amazed how many times they go out of there just holding hands and happy. Oh, I thought you were saying this. kind of to Shanti's point a minute ago about, you know, that her husband just wanted to feel like he was doing a halfway decent job. I believe, like I tell couples this, you know, when I don't just have a formula I use, but here's an important one. You should know what each other's core fear is. And I think generally speaking, they're going to be kind of the same for men, kind of the same for women, but it's always good to be open to the possibility they're not. But if you know each other's core fear, and you can get that if you get some outside help, then you can figure out, okay, how can I do a better job of protecting you in that area? How can I do a better job of meeting your needs in that area? Now, if for some reason you can't find a counselor, if you have 2 or 3 really strong, healthy, trustworthy couples, just get together, and somewhere you've got to take the mask off. You've got to come out from behind all that propping of your self-image, and you got to say whatever. And you know, like we've been saying all along, it isn't really that complicated, but it isn't easy. So you've got to find somewhere. Part of what I do is travel in like dear friends of Shanti and mine, and they wouldn't mind me saying this, Dennis and Colleen Rouse, they pastor a church of 10, 11,000 people, and they bring me in occasionally to work with their staff, but also with them. And I promise you, I'm allowed to say things to Dennis and Colleen there might not be 2 other people on the planet can get away with saying. But it's because of their love for each other that they're willing to do that and actually pay me to come beat them up. I mean, how cool is that?
And Chip, how would, if a pastor is listening right now, ministry leader is listening, and they said, hey, I want you to come, I want to talk to you about coming and doing that for our church, how would they get in touch with you?
Well, I mean, there's only so much of it I can do. Best thing to do is just contact me through Seacoast, really. But the other thing I could do, though, is if they wanted to contact me, I could help them find somebody in their area. Yeah. In other words, I know the questions. I know how to interview a counselor in 5 minutes and tell you if you want to work with them. There's certain schools of thought that counseling comes out of, and there's 2 or 3 of them that are very compatible with Christianity. And I could even, you know, give them 2 or 3 questions to ask. Because, you know, the thing that we forget is if I go to see a counselor, I'm writing them a check. They're not writing me a check. They work for me. I don't work for them. So you're allowed to say, you know, I need you to convince me that you can provide the service that I want.
That's good. That's good. Hey, Shanti, as far as for you, what are some resources that you have available? Of course, you've got your books. Also, any kind of web presence that you have. And then if churches were wanting to say, hey, let's just talk about you coming in and speaking, how would they find out more about that, and what are some things you have to offer as you help pastors and churches process all of this information?
Yeah, well, the easiest way to reach me is through my website, and you can see all of the books and the different resources that we have there, and that's shanti.com, SHAUNTI.com. One of the things that I'd encourage pastors to think about, we all know, probably I'm assuming in your world, that most of the people who are going to be looking at this are most likely to be male pastors, sometimes watching with their wife, sometimes not. But one of the things that I have seen behind the scenes quite often is that the first person that the pastor, when I do a pastoral interview, or I'm there to do a women's conference and to share about men, secretly, the first person that the pastor is hoping to hear this is his wife. And one of the reasons for that is, again, is that we care about each other, and she cares about and appreciates him a great deal, but he doesn't feel like it. He feels like she's criticizing him a lot, or she just truly does not know how much he needs a cheerleader. And she thinks that's old-fashioned. She thinks he's got a boatload of confidence. It's his pride, and, you know, a pastor shouldn't have that kind of ego, and completely misses the fact that it's not ego, it's self-doubt. And the fact that inside our strong and confident men, there's a little boy in there who's wanting to be great, wanting to be really good at what he does, and is looking to the most important woman in his life for affirmation. And is doubting, you know, am I any good? Was that message any good? Am I doing what I need to be doing as a man, as a husband, and as a pastor, or as a counselor, or any kind of other ministry leader? And I think us as women, for all you men who are listening to this, we take you at face value, and we truly don't realize just how much vulnerability there is inside. And we honestly don't understand a few little changes that we could make that would make a big difference in your life. And so I just really encourage you as a man, just like Sean said at the beginning, he read for women only, to see what I was saying about men. I really encourage you to look at For Women Only and what I'm telling the women about the men, and it might give you some language to share some of these things with your wife that were maybe a little bit difficult to articulate before. Because that's another thing, is often, at least this is the way the men I've interviewed and surveyed have said, is they can't always explain why something hurts their feelings. Not that you men would ever say, this hurts my feelings, because you don't use that kind of language, but why you can't explain necessarily why something might be painful or make you angry. And hopefully this will give you a little bit of language so that you can share some of that with your wife, first and foremost. And having that strong marriage, you two together, I would imagine, and Chip can correct me if I'm wrong, but I would imagine that more than anything else is one of the things that will put wings in your ministry, is knowing that you have a wife who believes in you, behind you.
Yeah, there's no doubt about it. And I mean, I sit here and I think it's great that you're coming from that angle. I agree 100%. But the other side of the coin is a lot of wives are dealing with feeling like their husband has a mistress.
Yeah, the church.
And it's called the ministry. So it's kind of a tricky, it's kind of a tricky cycle. But I absolutely agree with you. Sean, to go back to your question a minute ago, one thing I would tell people, like you said, if somebody was interested in whatever, one of the things that Greg and I have talked about, and actually you and I have talked about, because you're going to be helping us do this, is we've talked about doing some what I guess I would call immersion experiences, where we've talked about having 3-day, 2-night experiences where guys come in with their peers. We would try to, group people with, where they're in the same stage of ministry life, etc. And it would be guys alone once, and then couples, and just to really try to help them learn how to create environments where the dialogue can go deeper and accomplish more of what it needs to do. In other words, try to give them the skills they need to do this stuff at home. And so whatever, that's one thing they could kind of keep an eye on as we get that going down the road.
Awesome. And now, Shanti, I'll go back to what you were saying too. I was thinking as you were talking, and that whole idea of giving men a language and ways to communicate what they're needing to communicate. And I remember that was one of the things that Chip really helped me through. I'm a very driven leader, as most lead pastors probably are. I'm very, eyes on the game. And my wife coined a phrase for me. She said, I'm an emotional camel. In other words, I need a little bit emotional every now and then, and I just save it for a very, very long time. And what Chip helped me to understand is that, hey, you know what Connie wants is she wants you to every now and then be able to communicate to her what you're feeling.
Yeah.
And honestly, and this is it's hilarious, but it took a year at least for Chip to help me with the language, to say things that Connie was saying to me, and I would go, what? And it's surprisingly difficult sometimes for men to communicate to that. But here's what I found on the other side of actually a year being a bonehead and kind of finally figuring it out, is the end result of that. And I would encourage the men listening that are, like you said, pastors, and a lot of them listening, get your wife to listen to this, but one, and also take that step, because that was exactly what she needed, was to see that there was this emotional side to me that he had just kind of figured didn't exist and just wasn't needed, and to kind of know now that it's there, but I needed language, I needed tools, I needed ways to communicate that, has been just a blessing to her. So I think there is two sides to that. And so men, I would say, your wife needs to be your cheerleader, but you need to open up, you need to to get to your feminine side or whatever. I don't know what you call it, but
well, see, Sean, what you're saying there is exactly the dynamic. Is that you guys can talk to the men and I can talk to the women.
exactly. And it's awesome.
You know, Sean, as I listened to you share your story, I didn't charge you enough.
Yeah, you did.
That was too hard work.
a Starbucks every now and then for what I got.
I forgot how hard it was, man.
Hey, if you can get this emotional camel to open up, it's incredible. Hey guys, thank y'all so much for being here. Hey, I want to mention you can pick it up. It's available now. The Good News About Marriage, and I don't say that just as a plug. I just think as pastors, this is good news we need to share, and we need to have our facts straight too. So make sure it gives you the opportunity to have the truth. Then you can share the truth. You know what's really out there. You know what you're really working on, and just the hope. Connie and I, as I said earlier, are going to be preaching on marriage in just a couple weeks. We're going to share this as a part of it. Just the good news that it's not as doom and gloom as it seems like, and you guys can turn this around. That's going to be very helpful. So pastors, pick that up. Have that as a resource for you as you preach, as a resource for your people. The Good News About Marriage. It's available at Amazon, Barnes & Noble, everywhere. You can pick it up online, digital, Kindle, that whole deal. Shanti.com to just find out more information about Shanti and all that she does and all that she offers out there. ChipJudd.com, I believe it is, right, Chip, where they can find out more information about Chip and what he does, and you can find him and some of the resources he has there too. And just thank you guys for being a part. Thank you, Shante. Thank you, Chip, for being on the Ministry Hangout without Greg Surratt today, but I know he'll be watching this and catching up, and we'll be back next month for another Ministry Hangout. Here's what we're talking about next month is student ministry. If you're a pastor, leader, ever worked in student ministry, you know it has changed so much. Things have changed. Things are changing. And honestly, as I look across the landscape, I don't think there's anybody that has it figured out right now. How do we reach students? How to reach teens? But we're going to talk about what we're learning, what's out there, the resources that are there, and this next generation, what we can do to just to help them to be closer, find freedom in Christ. And so that's what we're looking for next month. Join us in September as we do that. Again, thank you, Shanti. Thank you, Chip. And thank you guys for joining us on Ministry Hangouts with Greg Surratt.